Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. There's so much talk of artificial intelligence, how it's changing the workplace and education and businesses, but what about wars? How can tools like ChatGPT be used for military purposes? The Pentagon held a special meeting to explore. We'll tell you about it. Also, what the pitfalls of fighting wars with robots are. Is this a scenario that we're ready for? In China, Xi Jinping is on a new mission, armed companies, militias for private businesses. We'll explain. In India, the Prime Minister of Greece is visiting. We'll tell you what's on the agenda. In the US, Donald Trump has compared himself to Alexei Navalny. A court has ruled that frozen embryos are children. What does it mean for IVF? Is it still legally viable then? In Guinea, the military has dissolved the government and sealed borders. Also, the story of the youngest chess player to beat a grandmaster, 8-year-old Ashwat Kosik. The link between obesity and mental health and why it's a crisis that cannot be ignored anymore, plus a special interview on the show. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Amid the diplomatic row between Brazil and Israel over the Gaza war, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets Brazilian President Lula da Silva. President Lula had compared US ally Israel's Gaza offensive to the Holocaust. In response, an angry Israel declared Lula as persona non grata. Iran invites the chief of the International Atomic Energy Agency to visit in May. Since 2021, the UN agency has struggled to carry out inspections on Iran's nuclear program. Tehran denies it wants to make nuclear weapons, but efforts to restore the 2015 nuclear deal remain in limbo. Sri Lanka repaying its oil debt to Iran with tea. Cash-strapped Colombo has exported tea worth $20 million to Tehran. Sri Lanka's total oil debt to Iran is $251 million. The tea for oil deal was agreed upon in December 2021, but exports have been delayed due to Colombo's economic crisis. In India, the opposition India bloc finalizes its seat-sharing pact for Uttar Pradesh. The state has 80 Lok Sabha seats. The Congress party will contest from 17 seats, the Samajwadi party from the remaining 63. This is the first major seat-sharing deal to be sealed by the opposition ahead of the general election. And trouble for food giant Nestle. Consumer watchdog Food Watch has filed a complaint accusing Nestle of fraudulently treating water for its top mineral water brands like Perrier and Vittel. Last month, a probe found that 30% of mineral water sold in France was unfit for drinking. Artificial intelligence is like a Hollywood spy. During the day, he's all cuddly, the perfect spouse, the caring parent, and seemingly boring. But by night, we see a different face, a lethal and ruthless avatar. AI too has such a face. It's not just a funny and informative chatbot. It can also be a killer machine, and looks like the Pentagon wants to meet this alter ego, maybe even recruit it. Now, the Pentagon already has an AI department. On Tuesday, they organized a symposium in Washington. The topic was AI and military, specifically large language models or LLMs, large language models. ChatGPT, for example, is an LLM. You can type in a question and the LLM will respond. It could be useful for spy agencies. They have access to a lot of information. Some of it is in public domain. Some of it is painstakingly gathered. You could say there is a data overload for them. So today's challenge is not gathering or collecting data. Today's challenge is analyzing it. How do you join the dots? How do you figure out patterns? Humans may take a long time to decode such puzzles. AI will not. It can comb through data in the blink of an eye, which is why security agencies are looking at language models. But the uses do not end there. LLMs can also be used for other military purposes like wargaming, or training officers, or even real-time decision-making. The Pentagon is exploring all of this. They have roped in a company called Scale AI. Its job is to test out large language models or LLMs in military operations to see how good they are. You can understand why they're doing it. Bots are a lot faster. They can crunch more data and hence take more informed decisions. They can also cut short human labor. Think of surveillance or reconnaissance. Earlier, human pilots or soldiers would do it. They would enter or loiter in enemy territory. But bots can reduce the risk factor. You can leave such dangerous jobs to them. So on paper, AI can help. But here's the problem. Artificial intelligence is not perfect. Some language models are prone to hallucination, meaning they make stuff up. I'll give you an example. Do you remember the Chinese spy balloon over America last year? The US eventually shot it down, and researchers asked AI about that incident. Look at the model's response. I'm quoting. The Chinese were not able to determine the cause of the failure. I'm sure they'll get it right next time. That's what they say about the first test of the A bomb. They're Chinese. They'll get it right next time. Now, the first problem here is obvious, a bias about China. This AI model believes that China eventually gets things right. Such a bias can affect decision making. Also, the facts are inaccurate. China does know what happened to their balloon. They criticize Washington for shooting it down, so that's a big problem, hallucination. The second problem is cyber security risk. All language models eat data for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and military ones will need sensitive data. But what if someone hacks it or games it to leak the training data? Some hackers did that with ChatGPT. They got it to leak its training data. What if the same happens to a military AI? Troves of sensitive information could be at risk here. But the biggest problem is not any of this. In fact, it's not hallucinations or data leak. It's the real world impact. There are no rules around bots on the battlefield. You can't say it's illegal. But modern warfare is rooted in international law. Most importantly, the IHL, the International Humanitarian Law. It has three major principles or foundations. Number one, making a distinction between civilians and combatants. Number two, proportionality, making sure that the military response is justified and limited. And number three, precaution, trying to limit casualties from the onslaught. Now the question is, can AI follow these rules? Most experts say it cannot. You see, machines and computers are calculated. They operate without emotions. They do not understand responsibility or accountability. Maybe for them, missions outweigh civilian lives. Now I know what you're thinking. Are humans any different? We've seen presidents and prime ministers carpet bomb countries. Do they value civilians or human life? No, they don't. But in that case, you know who to blame. You know who's responsible. But with artificial intelligence, it's different. Who do you blame for such mistakes? The army chief, the company that made the AI model, or the president who gave the approval? Do you see the problem here? AI in the battlefield is a legal and moral gray area, but it's also powerful enough to be a game changer, which is why every country is racing for it. In 2017, China made a major announcement. Beijing said it wants to become the world's AI leader by 2030. But sanctions have hurt them. Experts say Chinese AI models are behind the American ones. By how much? Around 18 to 24 months. So it looks like the US still has the edge. It's a wake-up call for other countries too. Warfare is changing before our eyes. It's not just about the army's size anymore. It's also about how smart it is. So countries like India need to work on their own sovereign AI models, models that can crunch India's data, models that can calculate India's strategic interests. And this is a race you cannot fall behind in, because once you do, it takes ages to level the playing field. And that's one of the many topics we'll be discussing at the Firstpost Defense Summit. How will technology and AI shape warfare? How can India secure its borders and seas? And how do we navigate this era of multiple conflicts? We'll be speaking to India's top defense officials, discussing India's military ambitions and hearing from Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. So tune in this Saturday to catch some lively discussions. And if you're in New Delhi, you can use this website to register. Make sure you don't miss this. Speaking of unconventional warfare, a new trend is emerging in China. Companies are setting up their own army, sort of like volunteer militias. These are not full-time soldiers of the PLA. These are people who have day jobs, but when required, they can be deployed, whether it's war, natural disaster, or logistics. Now, reports say at least 16 Chinese companies have done this. One of them is a private company, a dairy giant called Yili. In December last year, this company raised its own militia. I guess the question is why? Why do companies need an army? Some background first. Militias have a long history in China. They fought alongside the communists in the Civil War. Later on, Mao Zedong promoted them. He embedded these militias in communes and state firms. And the idea was quite simple. A, to protect the new regime from foreign attacks because Mao was suspicious of the US and Taiwan. And B, to impose his vision on the state. These militias became communist watchdogs in the communes. They would keep an eye on people, crush dissent, and promote Mao's ideas. Looks like Xi Jinping likes that plan, which is why the militias are back in China. They're called the People's Armed Forces Department. They remain under the PLA's command. And how many fighters do they have? We don't have a number yet, but men between ages 18 and 35 can enlist. Women too are free to join, so chances are it's a big force. But why does China need it? After all, the PLA is a massive fighting machine. It's the largest army in the world. It has some 2.8 million soldiers and a budget of more than $220 billion. So why does the PLA need backup? Experts say these militias are not for missions abroad. Their job is domestic, to monitor and crush dissent inside China. And it's obvious why. After years of rapid growth, China is slowing down. Since 1990, their average annual growth was 9%. Some years, it crossed 14%. That's the pace at which China grew. But now, GDP growth is just 5.2%. The property sector is in deep trouble. Local governments are sinking under debt. And youth unemployment was 21% last year. So the Chinese regime is a bit scared. Last year saw almost 1,800 labor strikes and demonstrations in China, 1,800. The year before, it was just around 800. Now, we're not saying that the regime is under threat or that there is some mass movement erupting in China, because there isn't. But authoritarians do not need nationwide protests to be spooked. Even minor ones will do the trick. Hence the militias. Xi Jinping wants more control over the corporate sector in China. He wants to nip dissent in the bud, also push his agenda in Chinese companies. We've seen similar strategies before. Most Chinese companies now have in-house Communist Party cells. Their bylaws confirm their ties to the party. So I guess militias were the next step. It's the cost of running a police state. I'll show you some interesting numbers. In fact, in 2020, China spent $210 billion on internal security. $210 billion on internal security, that's surveillance, police and espionage. It was 7% higher than the defense budget. Imagine that. You're spending more to control your own people than to defend them. And this sums up Xi Jinping's ideology. Any other leader would focus on turning the economy around, but not Xi Jinping. His focus is on controlling the people of China, on making sure that they do not protest. We say he's digging his own grave because investors are only looking for excuses to leave China, and I guess armed companies work perfectly. Now let's turn to India. New Delhi is hosting an esteemed guest today, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece. Many of you know Greece for its heritage and culture. Like India, it is home to an ancient civilization. Greece also draws in hordes of tourists. Its beautiful islands are usually on every globetrotter's bucket list. But what about the country's strategic importance? How does Greece fit into the larger geopolitical picture? For India, Greece is a gateway to Europe. Strong ties with Greece are essential for Indo-European trade. That is one of the reasons why the Greek Prime Minister is in India, to unlock this potential. India has been laying the groundwork for this visit. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to Greece last August. They upgraded the level of ties. Now it's a strategic partnership. The India-Greece relationship, it's a strategic partnership. Also, a dialogue mechanism was created between the national security advisors from both countries. Talks also began on defense and shipping cooperation. An ambitious trade target was announced in August, and today it was reiterated by the Indian Prime Minister.
Friends, हमारी आज की चर्चाएं बहुत ही सार्थक और उपयोगी रही। यह प्रसन्नता का विषय है कि हम 2030 तक द्विपक्षीय व्यापार को 2 गुना करने के लक्ष्य की ओर तेजी से अग्रसर है।
Where does Indo-Greek bilateral trade stand at the moment? It was about $2 billion in 2022-23. The countries plan to add another $2 billion in the next 6 years, and defense will be a key part of this.
भारत में डिफेंस मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में को प्रोडक्शन और को डेवलपमेंट के नए अवसर बन रहे हैं, जो दोनों देशों के लिए लाभदायक हो सकते हैं। हमने दोनों देशों के रक्षा उद्योगों को आपस में जोड़ने पर सहमति जताई है।
The defense ties will also help overcome challenges facing a core Indian development plan, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This corridor was announced last September during India's G20 presidency. The corridor was supposed to link India to Europe via West Asia. But a lot has happened since the G20 Leaders Summit. The Israel-Hamas war has thrown West Asia into disarray. The Yemen-based Houthis have crippled trade in the region. This is the crucial middle portion of the economic corridor, and the instability threatens both Indian and Greek ambitions. The corridor was supposed to begin in India and terminate in Europe via Greece through its ports in the city of Piraeus. But as things stand, the corridor is under threat. And even if peace returns and the corridor starts operating, future instability in West Asia may hold trade to ransom again. So it's no wonder that India and Greece are coming together. Both nations want to enhance their defense capacity so that they can influence security in West Asia and keep their trade channels open. That's one key aspect of the Greek Prime Minister's visit to India. Another is people-to-people ties.
Here we are working, and I'm sure we will finalize very quickly, a very important agreement on migration and mobility. It will constitute a very important step towards strengthening our cooperation in issues such as legal migration, fighting human trafficking, but also offering young Indians an opportunity to come and work in Greece and benefit from the growth of our economy.
Trade, defense and migration, these are the pillars of the new Indo-Greek relationship. That is what the leaders of the two nations are building amid rising challenges, both global and local. And the challenges are more similar than you would imagine. The Greek Prime Minister's visit comes at an interesting time during a farmers' protest on the outskirts of the Indian capital. The irony is that Mitsotakis just left a farmers' protest back home. Tractors had taken over Athens, the capital of Greece, just as they are poised to take over Delhi. The images prove that both India and Greece have ties that extend through the ages. On Friday, Alexei Navalny died in prison. He was a Russian opposition leader, Putin's fiercest critic. His death led to an uproar. Western leaders were quick to react. They condemned Vladimir Putin. They blamed him for Navalny's murder, but not Donald Trump. The former US president was unusually quiet, which is strange given that he has an opinion about most things in the world. For 72 hours, Trump said nothing. But on Monday, he suddenly had an epiphany. So like all self-respecting adults, he took to social media. Of course, he did not blame Putin. But he wrote this, and I'm quoting, "The sudden death of Alexei Navalny has made me more and more aware of what is happening in our country." That was what he posted on Truth Social, Donald Trump. Of course, no one realized what it meant. How was Navalny's death related to America? So Trump clarified in an interview. He was asked about Navalny, and this is what he had to say.
Navalny is a very sad situation, and he's very brave. He was a very brave guy because he went back. He could have stayed away. And frankly, probably would have been a lot better off staying away and talking from outside of the country as opposed to having to go back in, because people thought that could happen, and it did happen. And it's a horrible thing. But it's happening in our country, too. We are turning into a communist country in many ways. And if you look at it, I'm the leading candidate. I got indicted. I never heard of being indicted before. I got indicted 4 times.
Sounds like a lot to process, so let me break it down for you. Donald Trump says that Navalny was brave. He should have never returned to Russia. His death was a horrible thing. So far, so good. But then he suddenly changes tune. Trump says the same is happening in the US. How? Because he is being indicted. Basically, Donald Trump is comparing his legal troubles to Navalny's persecution. He says he is under trial because he is the opposition. Is there merit to this charge? Let's compare the lives of these two men. Alexei Navalny had humble beginnings. His dad was an army officer. He was born and brought up in Moscow. He entered politics in the early 2000s. He was persecuted for criticizing Vladimir Putin. He was poisoned with Novichok, arrested multiple times, and died while serving a prison sentence in the Arctic Circle. For many, it's a story of courage and resilience. And then there's Donald Trump. He too claims that he had humble beginnings. But reports suggest that Trump was a millionaire at the age of 8. That doesn't sound very humble. His father had a successful real estate business. Trump took it over. He won the US election in 2016. His tenure was controversial. It had scandals, even an impeachment or two. In 2020, he lost the election to Joe Biden. His supporters stormed the Congress. Trump did not stop them. He did not even concede defeat. Right now, he has more than 90 cases against him. Hush money, fraud, election subversion. None of that has to do with him being in politics. In fact, a recent survey ranked him the worst US president, the worst among 45 presidents. So Navalny was charged for pushing for democracy, and Trump was charged for subverting it. Yet Donald Trump thinks that their cases are similar. Maybe Delulu is the new Sululu, as the young say. Their stories could not have been more different. Yet there is one similarity. Both Trump and Navalny's supporters think that they are martyrs. Martyrs who are fighting for truth. Navalny was fighting to save democracy. Trump is fighting to make America great again. In the eyes of their supporters, these men can do no wrong. Any criticism of them is propaganda because in the age of social media and alternative facts, perception often trumps reality, pun intended. And both these men built their images of heroes fighting injustice, real or imaginary. Now, staying with the US, more bizarre things are happening there. The Alabama Supreme Court delivered a ruling. Every state has a Supreme Court in the US. The one in Alabama has come up with the first of its kind decision. And what does it say? Frozen embryos are children. I'll repeat that for you. Frozen embryos are children. That's what the court says. What does that mean? Human eggs are often fertilized outside the uterus. It's through a process called IVF, in vitro fertilization. Usually, more eggs are fertilized than needed. The remaining ones are stored, maybe even destroyed later. That's how IVF works. Now that the court has ruled these embryos are children, it's raised a lot of questions. Is IVF still viable? Can patients store unused embryos? Can clinics destroy extra embryos? Can other American states take similar steps? Our next report tells you.
In 2020, a patient snuck into a freezer at the Mobile Infirmary Medical Center. It was where the clinic stored fertilized embryos. The patient wandered into this room. They dropped a few trays. It contained the embryos. They were destroyed. It belonged to 3 couples, so they decided to sue the clinic. The case reached the Alabama Supreme Court. It ruled that frozen embryos can be considered children under state law. This is what Justice J. Mitchell wrote. Unborn children are children without exception based on developmental stage, physical location, or any other ancillary characteristics. So if embryos are children, they are entitled to the same rights as children. That means those couples can sue the facility for wrongful death. But the implications will not just be restricted to this case. This could affect the whole of Alabama. Sometimes human eggs are fertilized outside the uterus. It's through a process called IVF. In vitro fertilization. The ovaries are stimulated. It produces multiple eggs. These eggs are extracted. Experts fertilize these eggs in a laboratory. So embryos are created in the lab. Doctors then transfer an embryo or 2 into the patient's uterus. The others are stored for future use. IVF is often used in cases of infertility or when the patient requires external medical help. or if they want to bear children at an older age. At least 2 million people use it worldwide every year, and in America, the number is on the rise. An average IVF treatment costs $12,400 in the US, yet more people are using it than ever before. Which brings us to the extra embryos. They are usually stored with the patient's consent. They can keep it if they want a child later, but at some point, the stored embryos are destroyed or even used for medical research like testing. All with the patient's consent, of course. But the Alabama court's decision has thrown all of this into jeopardy. If every embryo is a child, that means you cannot store or freeze embryos. It won't be legally viable under state law. Then there's the destruction. Usually more embryos are fertilized than needed. Most times they're destroyed. But after this ruling, can they be destroyed anymore? If you're a doctor, you could be charged with manslaughter. If you're a clinic, you could be charged with wrongful death. The medical provider will then have two options. Either extract fewer eggs, reducing the chances of fertilization, or they could transfer all created embryos to the patient. That means patients can be pregnant with twins, triplets, quadruplets, even if they don't want more than a single child. Right now, Alabama doesn't know what the implications could look like, but it has sent clinics and doctors scrambling. Until now, IVF was seen as a way to start a family. The recent ruling has raised questions about it. It may not be illegal yet in Alabama, but it makes the process riskier and definitely more expensive for both patients and doctors.
Now let's turn to Africa, to the country of Guinea, where the military has dissolved the government and sealed borders. Now here's some context. Guinea is part of the West African coup belt. It's another junta-ruled former French colony. The military took over the country in the year 2021. They ousted President Alpha Condé, who controversially stood for and won a third term. The military decided to intervene and they captured the president, took over the presidential palace and declared that they would restore democracy. If the story sounds familiar, that's because it is. West Africa has seen numerous coups over the last few years. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger are some examples. Guinea is also part of this coup belt. But it was looked at a bit differently. The military here had agreed to return to democracy in a given time frame. They had agreed to hold elections and hand over power by December 2024. That's this year. They were working with the civilian government to achieve this, a government that the junta itself had appointed after the coup. But there's been a new development now. On Monday, Guinea's junta made this announcement.
Article 1.
Article 1. The government is dissolved. Article 2. Everyday matters will be managed by the Cabinet Directors, Secretaries General and Deputy Secretaries General until a new government is put in place. Article 3. This decree, which abrogates all previous provisions to the contrary, takes effect from the date of its signature and will be registered and published in the Official Journal of the Republic. Conakry, 19th February 2024, Lieutenant General Mamadi Doumbouya.
Let me break that down for you. Guinea's junta-appointed civilian government has been dissolved. No reason has been given. Government functions are to be conducted by junior officials. A new government will apparently be put in place, but no timeline has been given for this. That's all that the junta has said in its official announcement. Also, a side note. Look at the way this announcement was delivered. Multiple soldiers in this frame, standing on a flight of stairs, some of them wearing masks and holding rifles. It was very cliche and clearly meant to intimidate people. Later, Guinea's chief of Army General Staff also made a statement. He said the bank accounts of the current ministers would be blocked. Their passports would be confiscated. They have been ordered to surrender their official vehicles and Guinea's borders have been sealed, at least until the ministers give all power back to the junta. And this announcement also hints at a rift between the junta and the civilians they appointed. Now, it sounds like the ministers have become fugitives and they are on the run. We haven't had too much information coming in from Guinea. The junta maintains tight control of the internet in the country. Demonstrations are also banned and they have been stamped out with deadly force in the past. So it may be a while before all the details of this story become clear and public. But of chief concern is the transition to democracy. How does this affect the timeline? The junta was supposed to take power back by December this year. Will they still give power back, rather? Will they still adhere to this deadline? Or will this drama with the government be used as an excuse, a reason for the junta to extend its hold on power? It's anyone's guess for now, but one thing should be noted. Guinea's junta is not without potential friends. 3 of its neighbors are also run by juntas: Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. The 3 nations have already come together. They have formed an alliance. They're even planning to come up with a new common currency. These 3 nations may welcome a 4th musketeer. So Guinea's junta may have an incentive to work with them. But what does that mean for the people of the country, for Guinea, and for stability in West Africa overall? We'll find out in the days to come. Our next story is about Ashwat Kosik. He was born in India around the age of 1. His family moved to Singapore at the age of 4. Kosik's parents introduced him to chess. Within a year, he was beating family members at chess, and now at the age of 8, Kosik has made history. He has become the youngest chess player to beat a grandmaster. 8-year-old Kosik beat a 37-year-old Polish grandmaster. What's more, Kosik broke this age record that was set only days before, when a Serbian 8-year-old beat a 59-year-old Bulgarian grandmaster, proving once again that the future has arrived as competitive chess is seeing a surge in prodigies. Here's a report.
Watch out, there is another chess prodigy on the scene. We are talking about Indian origin Singaporean Ashwat Kosik. At the age of 8 years, 6 months and 11 days, Kosik has made history. He has become the youngest player ever to beat a chess grandmaster in a classical tournament game. This is no mean feat, because a grandmaster is the highest title awarded in chess, apart from that of a world champion. So this is a big victory for an 8-year-old. But who is Ashwat Kosik? He was born in India. His family moved to Singapore when he was just a year old. At the age of 4, he started playing chess, and within a few months, he was beating family members at the game. Now, at the age of 8, Kosik competed at the Bergdorfer Stadthaus Open in Switzerland, where he beat the 37-year-old Polish grandmaster Jacek Stoper. Kosik finished 12th in the tournament, but this is only the beginning. Kosik's win is worth celebrating. More so because it goes beyond him. He is part of an emerging crop of youngsters in the world of competitive chess. The sport is witnessing a surge in child prodigies, who are achieving extraordinary results. Here's an example. Kosik broke a record that was set just last month, when Leonid Ivanovic from Serbia beat 59-year-old Bulgarian grandmaster Milko Popchev. Now, you want to know how old Ivanovic was when he did this? Not even 9. The chess world now belongs to child prodigies. But it's not just chess. Meet Luke Littler, 16-year-old darts prodigy. Or 9-year-old skateboarder Marcel Perez Alegado. Then there is the 13-year-old gamer Willis Gibson, who became the first to beat the unbeatable Tetris last month. But no sport is swamped with precocious children like chess, many of whom come from India. Like D. Gukesh, Arjun Erigesi, and Nihal Sarin. And who can forget 18-year-old R. Pragnanantha, India's rising chess star. He continues to script history and beat records. Just last month, Pragnanantha became the #1 ranked Indian player for the first time in his career. He defeated the reigning world champion Ding Liren in the Netherlands. Now, Kosik has joined the club. Reflecting on his triumph, he said, "I felt proud of my game and how I played, especially since I was worse at one point, but managed to come back from that." That poised remark speaks volumes and shows the level-headed maturity of an 8-year-old. Kosik is another bright star to have now entered the world of chess. The future has arrived, and we are here for it.
Before I begin our next story, I want you to picture a scenario. It may be troubling, but stay with me. Imagine you've been listed for an operation. It could be anything, maybe a cataract surgery or a knee replacement. But before you go ahead with the procedure, the doctor tells you to see a psychiatrist. They say you need to pass a psychiatric assessment. Only then will you be cleared for surgery. That's not all. There is a 1 in 5 chance that you will fail this test. So 1 in 5 chance that you will not be getting the surgery that you need. How would you feel about that? This is an impossible situation. You'd probably feel cheated. But for obese patients, this is their reality. Across many hospitals, especially in the US and some European countries, this is standard practice. It applies to candidates for obesity surgery. They have to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. If they pass, surgeons are given a green light to proceed. If they fail, they're denied the surgery. And this happens in 20% of the cases, where life-transforming and possibly life-saving medical surgery is denied to people. This paints a troubling picture. Why is mental state seen as the origin of obesity? How are mental health and obesity linked? Tonight, that's what we'll discuss, but first the basics. What is obesity? It is defined as abnormal or excessive fat accumulation. And obesity is a disease, and it's not just about weight gain. It impacts most body systems, the heart, liver, kidneys, joints, reproductive system. Obesity leads to a range of other diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, strokes, even cancer. You see, obesity is a complex problem, and it affects more than 1 billion people the world over, across cultures, genders, and age groups. 650 million adults are obese. So are 340 million adolescents and 39 million children, and the numbers keep increasing. Long story short, we are struggling with a global obesity crisis. But there's another crisis that comes with it, a quandary of belief. You see, science has seen huge advances. Despite this, we do not know why some people cannot seem to lose weight, even when they try desperately. It's confusing and frustrating. So we jump to conclusions. We often point to the lack of willpower. Obesity is a disease of the body, but many see it as a disease of the mind, either a consequence of psychological problems or a result of a weak mental state. This belief exists among laypersons just as it does with some health professionals. But there is no credible scientific evidence to prove it. Maybe this belief persists because mental illness is more common in obese people. In fact, it is a fact, mental health and obesity are closely linked, but a person's mental state does not cause them to become obese. It is the other way around. Studies say obesity reduces blood flow to the brain. It increases risk of mental health problems like anxiety, depression, and Alzheimer's. So obesity hurts the brain, but it's not a psychological problem. Yet it is fueled by prejudice and underpinned by myth. So blaming obese individuals or denying them medical care is doing no good. Until this dogma persists, obesity cannot be tackled. So how can we fix this? How much can medical science help, and what role can society play? Earlier this week, I had a conversation with India's top bariatric surgeon, Dr. Mufazzal Lakrawala. Here is a snippet of that conversation. Hello and welcome to this very special conversation on Firstpost, where we'll try and talk about issues that touch you directly. Before I introduce our guest here, I want to share 2 data sets with you. Number one, at least 65 million individuals worldwide are said to be suffering from long COVID. The actual numbers may be higher because of undocumented cases. And number two, by 2035, more than half of the world's population will be obese. This is according to the World Obesity Foundation. So how do we identify and address these challenges, and how are these challenges impacting our lives without us acknowledging them? That's what we'll discuss, that and more. With me is Dr. Mufazzal Lakrawala, India's foremost laparoscopic surgeon, someone who specializes in bariatric surgery, and he has helped thousands of patients from across the world overcome debilitating conditions to get a new shot at life. Dr. Lakrawala, or should I say Dr. Mufi, welcome to Firstpost.
Thank you, Palki, and thank you for inviting me here. Actually, like your start very clearly said, we are facing 2 pandemics. One is of a communicable kind, which was the COVID-19 pandemic, which kind of made up and sit up and take notice of our health. And the other one was a non-communicable disease burden, which the whole world recognizes today. Things like diabetes, hypertension, various other dyslipidemia or cholesterol, whatever you want to call it in lay people's terms, is the non-communicable disease burden, which is actually affecting our lives. And the fact that both these kind of merge at some point financially, I read a recent report that said that $43.2 billion worth of expenditure might go into treating obesity and obesity-related illnesses by 2035. So it's almost close to the 2020 numbers of COVID and the amount of money the world spread. Yes, we are sitting on 2 time bombs. One we've probably overcome with the vaccination and everything. The other one, which is going to grow at such a speed, so we need to do something about it. I think it's a elephant in the room that a lot of us have ignored for too long. And why would I call it a disease? You know, I said disease. Most people don't recognize it.
I was going to ask you that's not how we see it. We see it as some sort of a lifestyle issue, the way we eat, sleep, conduct ourselves. Maybe that's what. But so, do we have a very skewed notion then of obesity?
Yeah, because how do you define disease, right? WHO's definition of disease is anything that produces a problem, anything that affects your functionality in the long term and decreases your lifespan. Obesity, tick off. And most importantly, we also do know that any disease, any process which causes other disease to grow along with it is again obesity. It does come with this harbinger of bringing comorbidities. We call it diabetes, we call it sleep apnea, we call it infertility. There are so many cancers which are linked to obesity. So why don't we recognize it as a disease? The world started recognizing, some of the developed countries have started recognizing it. I think for socio-political reasons, some of the underdeveloping countries or the developing countries are still not recognizing obesity as a disease.
You deal with people who are seeking weight loss all the time, and not all cases need medical intervention. But when you talk to them, what is your impression? How many of these people come to you because they need medical support, and how many are those who are just looking at the last resort of sorts because they can't deal with the shame or the stigma attached to it?
Stigma is one big problem that society deals with and subjects people with obesity. And, you know, as world associations, as individuals who treat obesity, our biggest problem is not treating the medical conditions of obesity, treating the mental health and the stigma associated with obesity. You could be anybody, right? You could be the most powerful man in the world. You could be the most richest man in the world. You could be the poorest of the poor. Stigma will not leave you if you are done with obesity. It's like how we are brought up, right? If someone with a weight problem were to be picking up a plate at a wedding reception, and probably that person is going to eat the least amount because he's cognitive of the fact that there are all the eyes on him. And actually that guy feels like a culprit. What am I doing here? He feels so socially uncomfortable being there. And that is what as society, as families, we need to understand that. Please treat the health problems, but don't stigmatize a person just for being heavier than normal.
I never sort of articulated it in my head or otherwise in this way, the way you've put it, that, you know, what may be going into the mind of somebody who knows that they're being watched and they're being sort of punished for no fault of theirs. And even those who lose weight, I think it's not a linear process. People lose and then in a lot of cases gain it again. How often in your experience does that happen, and how does it play on the mind of that person then?
The obese kids are not to be blamed at all. It's not their fault that they are heavy. And that's where, as society, we must understand that they are the ones who try the hardest. They keep blaming themselves for not fitting into the correct mold, that we call it, that fits into societal norms of being healthy. No, obese people are the most malnourished or the most unhealthy people.
So you're saying that people who have a weight problem or who are big and trying to lose weight are actually malnourished?
They are. Actually, the most obese people are the most malnourished of all individuals.
So is there no solution then? And then what do you tell these patients of yours who have been swinging between very high weight and then coming down and then gaining it again? And are there any specific cases that sort of spring to mind?
It's not a T20 match. It's a full-blown test match. You'll have to maintain that consistency for the rest of your life, right? We always do it for a reason, a season, but never for a lifetime. And that's the big problem with diet. For example, I'll tell you, it becomes even more difficult the more famous you are, because society trolls you, stigmatizes you because you're always in the limelight. For example, an actor or a politician, or even, for example, someone who's rich and famous is always in the media spotlight. We can always, as surgeons, hide ourselves behind the mask. Nobody knows. But it's more difficult for these people because every time they come out, They are under the media glare. They are trolled for no fault of theirs. For example, I'll tell you, I operated on Mr. Gadkari and Mr. Venkaiah Naidu because both have come out and said that they've had surgery. And both of them got surgery done because with diabetes and with sleep apnea, it was really affecting their political careers. And we've seen one went on to become the vice president, one has done so well as the transport minister. And they've done really well. They're much older, they did. And another person I can speak about because he is someone who's, I think, fought across this battle through time and again, right? Kid to one of the richest people in Asia, Anant. He's tried very hard, right? From his young days, I know this, because Anant Ambani, yeah. Anant Ambani was one guy who everyone has vilified. Every time he's lost weight, poor guy, everyone says, oh, he's had taken the simple solution. He's gone and got this surgery done. Yeah, I know. Some people have even claimed that I know who's operated on him. I've been told so many times, have you operated on him? And
it's very interesting, you know, because you rightly say that this is talked about a lot in the media, and most people just have an outsider's view of what's going on and are quick to pass comments and judge. That's how people are. And I guess it can be more difficult for people in the spotlight, because if you lose it, then you must have taken the easy way out. And if you don't lose it, then you're just not showing the kind of commitment that is required to first fix yourself before doing something else. So I guess the pressure can be that much more.
And the poor guy's had quite a struggle, right? Struggle to be in the spotlight. Every time he sat on an IPL bench, people have sniggered and laughed at him. And that's really not fair. I mean, how do we know what he's tried or not tried? None of us know. Now I know him as a person and I know what all he goes through on a day-to-day basis and what all he tries. For example, he lost a lot of weight and that became news, right? Public news. And everyone said, wow, superb. He almost lost close to, from I think 217 or 20 when he was there. He came down to 79 kilos before Isha and Akash's wedding. And the whole world was talking about it because he was a famous guy and he just did it with diet and exercise. Somehow back again, he went up that steep curve, and then he again tried the same thing. It didn't work again. So it was not that he was very lazy suddenly, or he had started eating a lot of sugar, or he had stopped doing all the things that he had done correctly the first time around. And then he's had a lung issue, right? Since the age of 2. He's tried hell of a lot to try and get rid of it because of who he is. He's seen world experts and everybody. And I do remember because I was part of one of those meetings and some of the best experts in the space of obesity across the world have told him, you are a miracle. You've done brilliantly. And if these papers were put up in front of us, we would have never believed that you've actually lost this kind of weight with just diet and exercise. But he had made up his mind at that point of time to lose. Unfortunately, it's not only a mind issue. Now, when he's trying really hard, it's still a body issue. He will not necessarily lose the same kind of weight. Again, in the middle, he was contemplating whether to get surgery done or not. There are, to the media, I cannot speak about all the various diseases that come along with this thing, but I do know that he's one guy who's so positive. Every time I've spoken to him about it, and I do know that poor guy's been trolled for something or the other. And most people will be thinking, oh, he's a rich man's kid, so he must be eating a lot, or he must be just partying all the time and all. No, the guy, I do know that I had put him on a program and the guy was in the pool for 2 hours every single day, right? He would be on green juice, for example. He would have less than 500 calories because we thought that his body would lose that weight. So,
2022 was when the latest set of obesity drugs were introduced in the market. 2023, we saw the market boom, like on Firstpost in my show. We've done a lot of stories on how big these companies have become, some of them bigger than luxury brands now. 2024 is being tipped as the weight loss year of the weight loss drugs. Do you think that is the new normal? And we've not seen any harmful side effects, or at least I don't know of them. So would you say that medical science has finally cracked it?
No. Obesity is too complex a problem. It's too lifelong a problem. It's too chronic a disease, like I had called it earlier. So please don't fool yourself by saying this is the be-all and end-all. Yes, it's a key by which we've managed to open the door.
And it's not accessible as of today. I mean, if you look at your Ozempics and all, I think $1,000 per month is the average.
Not for the common man.
Yes. So with more pharma players now entering this, and with the way this is, I mean, there's a thriving black market. Do you think that this is going to be then the new normal, and we will have more accessible options going forward? In India, I believe the weight loss market is close to 2 lakh crore rupees. It's booming.
World over, you can imagine the kind of money that is being put into these kind of drugs. Yes, there are lots of drugs in pipeline today. There are single drugs like the Ozempics and the Mounjaros of the world. And then there are the other combination drugs which give you a good weight loss. What we do need to understand is that 20% or around there is good enough total body weight loss for getting rid of medical problems. Rest is all cosmetic. So quite often, everything is put under the same bouquet, right? From liposuctions to plastic surgery to bariatric surgery to Ayurveda to Unani to motivational speakers who kind of make you lose that. No, you can't put everything under one bracket. You need to dissect. There's not one size that fits all. Everyone will need a different solution. For example, because I had mentioned, and he's done brilliantly again. He's lost hell of a lot of weight and he's not had surgery. So I can say this on camera. He's not had surgery. He's working very, very hard. Probably has a goal to look forward to. Maybe his upcoming wedding, and he's looking really charged. He's right up there mentally to try and fight this. It's always going to be an uphill task, right? So he's always going to fight against the odds because his body, God has ordained with him. So God doesn't give us everything.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Spain, protesting farmers disrupt traffic in the capital Madrid. In Turkey, the country's first fifth-generation fighter jet takes to the skies. And in Japan, unusually warm weather is making cherry blossoms bloom in the month of February. Finally, we are also taking you back in history. On this day in 1972, US President Richard Nixon embarked on a historic 8-day visit to China. He was the first sitting US president to visit mainland China. His visit ended decades of Sino-US enmity. Leaving you on that note, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.